Hello, friends. We are here for our Sutra study program. And let's begin, as usual, by appreciating this handsome community we have gathered here today. Today, I feel fortunate to sit as a member of this kind community in the safety and security of like-minded friends, sharing this present moment with others dedicated to the cultivation of goodness. Today, I'm grateful for the direction and support that this community provides, a community worthy of my time and commitment, a community where my efforts have meaning, purpose, and are appreciated. Today, I'm thankful for this community of awakening, a place to gain the knowledge and skills to improve my life, a family, a home, and a sanctuary for all of us seeking refuge from the storm. And let's remember, as conscientious practitioners, we must recognize our responsibility to the world, to strive to live skillfully while helping others to do the same, to strive to live in balance and harmony with nature and others, to strive to gain mastery over our minds and embody our true benevolent nature, to expand our hearts and minds, transcending our shared human limitations, to not intentionally harm sentient life or our planet, and to maturely accept and embrace the reality of our situation while striving to improve it. Welcome, 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 one and all. So we just started our Sutra study program. Last week we had orientation, which is the recordings available for anybody that missed it. So this is officially our first class in our Sutra studies. And I am so thrilled to be offering it. It's something we wanted to do for a long time, and we're finally getting around to it. We have a lot of material to cover on the first class, let alone the chapter 1. So to begin with, so I wanted to say a couple things to begin with. First of all, let me see, maybe I could pop this on the screen. I'm trying to figure out the tech on how I'm going to share everything with everybody. So, and I should have done this before I came. Give me 1 second here. My apologies. I'm hoping that I can adjust this as we go. Oh, I think that'll work. All right, let's try this. Oh, I should have done this before. My apologies. Okay, I think everybody can see that on the screen. So I have now I'm going to see if I can change these. You guys see the changes, don't you? Okay, so that's cool. So I'm able to get all 3 text on here, and I thought that that would be important. So, so we talked about in our Sutra studies, of course, we're starting with one of the great texts, which is the Dhammapada. The Dhammapada is a collection of Buddhist sayings taken from the miscellaneous sutras, and it's just one of the great Theravada Pali texts. It was one of the first texts that I ever read, and probably for a lot of you it is, but it's a great snapshot of what the Buddhist teachings are. In just 26 chapters, it really covers a great deal of what the Buddha taught. In our program, we decided there's many different translations of the Dhammapada, and some of them are older and are taken more from Buddhaghosa's, which was a 15th century, the most important of the Theravada scholars from the 15th century. Some of them favor his commentarial presentation on the Dhammapada. Some are retranslating it from earlier versions that they believe is more accurate. But what's interesting is that they vary an amazing amount. Each one of the traditions you read, they vary so much. And so to me, that makes it fascinating. Nevertheless, we chose 3 texts to give us what I thought would be a nice rounded idea of the Dhammapada. The first is by an American ex-monk, Gil Fronsdale, and this is probably the most recommended Dhammapada in modern times. He did an absolutely brilliant job on this. He's out in California at the with Jack Kornfield at and he teaches kind of a combination of Zen and Theravada. So we have a nice modern rendition of the Dhammapada, which I think is probably the most accessible. So that's our main text, and that's the one a lot of you are holding up, Gil Fronsdal. But then we also have two other texts. The other choice I made was by Acharya Buddhaghosa, who's a person I never met, but I spent a lot of time in his monasteries throughout the world, and especially in India. But I've been in his monasteries also throughout the Himalayas. And he was an absolutely brilliant Theravada scholar. His origins are more from Sri Lanka. And but I think his take is a much more of a traditional take out of the three texts. So Gil Fronsdal gives us a modern take. Buddhaghosa gives us a more traditional take. And my third choice was by Gaden Chipel, which was a Tibetan scholar and a really unusual figure in Tibetan history. We talked about it last week, so I won't go into it again. But he was kind of a bad boy who ends up being an acclaimed master. What's interesting in Gaden Chipel's is that he actually goes to Sri Lanka to study and translate this. Oddly enough, out of the Buddhist, the Tibetan canon, the Dhammapada was not one of the texts translated in the Tibetan, even though the Tibetan canon is one of the largest canons in existence. So Gaden Chipel decides to do that, and he studies with, at the time, one of the prominent masters of the Theravada tradition. And so I think there's a great validity to Gaden Chipel's work. But it is translated first from Pali into Tibetan, and then there's a Tibetan translation group that translates it into English. So that extra step in translation, we have to take with a grain of salt. But nevertheless, it's very different than the others. And I think it adds a great insight into the workings of these. Okay, and to be honest, I think I like Gaden Chipel's the most. It's fascinating, his take on them all. So we'll leave that to everybody. One more thing I wanted to talk about, that the Dhammapada verses are grouped together only because they share common topics and are therefore are rarely actually related to one another. So when we read the Dhammapada, we'll read verse by verse, and oftentimes it's really easy to interpret one verse by the verse that came before it. It's important to remember they weren't written in order like that. These are Buddhist sayings taken from a vast area of the sutras and piecemealed and placed together just because they seem to share the same topics. And I'm sure they tried to put them in some kind of an order that they benefit each other. But with that said, we have to always be careful that we don't use the previous or later verses to interpret the verse we're reading. They're all standalone. Equally, the chapters themselves are arranged in no meaningful order. The first chapters are not any more important than later ones. And then also it's important to remember that the Dhammapada arises as a later addition to the sutras. So we have the early sutras, the Nikayas, and then we have a great deal of material that's, according to some scholars, are later additions to the sutras. Now, traditionalists see all the sutras as the words of the Buddha, unadulterated, but modern scholars do believe that that's not accurate, that it seems that there's a lot of commentary that slips into the sutras. And so we want to keep that in mind. And there are discrepancies in the sutras, and the discrepancies are usually asserted to arise as a form of skillful means, that the Buddha taught things and said things in different ways for different levels of students. So these are some things that we're going to have to keep in mind when we're going over the sutras. So I think I got through that pretty fast. With that said, I thought it'd be great to have some of our instructors read the, I need to shut this off for a second, to read the verses. One last thing, this is the first time we've offered this program. And so we're actually gonna create this program as a Sangha. I've never taught the sutras in this fashion before. I come from a commentarial tradition. We teach, the works of Nagarjuna and all the later scholars. So this is a great learning experience for me. And I hope Martin's going to pitch in and make sure I'm on the right track. Martin is a Theravada monk in England. So this is his stuff, boy. But nevertheless, we're going to create this program as a group, and we're going to figure out how it works. Loosely, my idea was to treat it like a book club. So we'll read some verses, and I suppose me running the class that I'm supposed to give some kind of insight into what I think. There's a bit of material to cover, so all of us need to keep our comments short if we can, so we can get through the material. And with that said, I think let's get some of our instructors to read something. Chantel, would you like to read the first verse? And
Sure,
the first chapter is in pairs, so you read the first two verses.
Mm-hmm. Torpa, I don't have the copy with me right now.
Okay, no problem. Darcy, would you like to read it?
Sure. The one out of the book?
The one out of the book. Yeah, we'll always read Gil Fronsdale's first. That's our
Okay.
primary text.
Sure.
So we're going to read the first two dichotomies. Yeah.
Okay. All right. All experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Speak or act with a corrupted mind, and suffering follows, as the wagon wheel follows the hoof of the ox. All experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Speak or act with a peaceful mind, and happiness follows, like a never departing shadow.
Oh, thank you. Lovely. So my thoughts on here is that I think it's important that this is the first one, because this seems to encapsulate all of Buddhism. And the thought is that our mind is the chief origin of our reality, of our happiness, of our sadness. All aspects of our existence are led by mind. Now, it's not necessarily that our mind creates our environment, but our mind interprets our environment. So no matter what's happening, and even the actions of other people, our mind still interprets all of those actions. So the mind is, in Buddhism, the mind is the beginning and end of all things. Does anybody else want to comment? We'll figure out how this is going to work.
Is it not also a statement of free will?
Yeah, so free will is an interesting question in Buddhism. I think it's clear, especially in traditional Buddhism, that free will exists, because the idea of karma and the idea that we can improve ourselves, that there is a volition there is an intention, we have the wish to improve ourselves. So free will definitely is an aspect of that, but it's just realizing the role of the mind in our lives. Just how central it is to everything we do. Master the mind, master your life. Master your mind, master happiness. Where other traditions, other religions, they put a lot of emphasis on the external. Universal consciousness, God, deities. Buddhism doesn't. Buddhism is about that. In fact, one of the Buddha's most pith instructions and easiest instructions, do only good, do no evil, purify the mind. To me, I think probably the most profound Buddhist teaching in that simple thing right there. David.
Could you clarify, by mind, does that mean the workings of the brain, or does it have some other meaning?
Yeah, so this very well depends on the tradition. In the Tibetan tradition, they see a distinction between the brain and the mind. They see the mind existing throughout our bodies in no distinct place. And the brain being a catalyst to mind, but not mind itself. And that's a very complicated question, David. That gets into consciousness and what aspects are reborn within us. But I think for now, that's about all we really have time for. That's a whole class in itself.
Papa-san?
Kenny?
Yes, I have a question. I wonder what's the difference between heart and mind, because I say often pure-hearted person, but not pure-mind person.
Sure. Well, I think just as an illustration, we often talk about our minds and our emotions being separate, that we feel our emotions in our heart, and in our cognitive thinking is in the mind. But clearly, this is just an illustration, right? The mind is also the place for all of our emotions as well. So I think that's just poetic. It's all mind. The heart is just a pump. Great. Who do we have? Yoli, would you like to read the next one?
Sure. He abused me, attacked me, defeated me, robbed me. For those carrying on like this, hatred does not end. She abused me, attacked me, defeated me, robbed me. For those carrying on like this, hatred ends.
Thank you, Yoli.
Should
Please
I read
continue.
the next? Okay.
Yeah.
Hatred never ends through hatred. By non-hate alone does it end. This is an ancient truth.
Thank you, Yoli. So I don't know about you, but I find the wording of this kind of problematic, because it almost reads like, that there's no compassion here for victims. And I'm not sure that that's the way it was meant to be. Robin?
I think a better word would maybe be like misery doesn't end. Like, for me, that text actually, or that verse really kind of hit me, because part of what brought me to Buddhism is like framing your mind better around things that have happened to you. Everybody's had bad things happen to you, but like my mother raised me, and she always like held on to the bad things and kind of had this woe is me mentality, and I always kind of pushed away from that. I don't know, just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. Does anyone have any thoughts on this? I'm trying to figure out how much commentary I give and how much listening I do. I want this to be open to everyone. But I find the whole thing reads very strangely to me. I'm not quite sure how I take it. Yoli?
When I first read this, I felt, I think like everybody else when they first read it. But when I stepped back and looked at the text in more detail, I just, the line that says, for those carrying on like this, hatred does not end. And I think it's just a literary kind of way to express, the things that we have within us that make us angry. And so I think it's just kind of the way, it's kind of a way to express the damage that's done when hatred and greed and all of that happens to us. I That's the way I look at it, rather than
Yeah, I
just
think-
looking at the abused, attacked.
Yeah.
We abuse ourselves, we attack ourselves, we defeat ourselves, we rob ourselves of,
Yeah.
happiness. So this is the way I ended up looking at it.
Yeah, I think when we read through the sutras, we always have to keep in mind, are we over-analyzing them? Because sometimes they can have just a simple message, like maybe this one is just the fact of, stop focusing on all the things that people have done or will do. I found it interesting in Gaiden Trippo's edition, they talked about it in the future tense, what they will hurt me, they will abuse me. And the idea is, as long as you're focused on all the things that other people are doing and have done to you, you'll always have that hatred. You have to let go. So in a sense, I think it's a bit of forgiveness. But in Buddhism, instead of forgiveness, I think Buddhism likes to favor understanding. When we understand why people do the things they do, and we realize that it's through their own limitations and afflictions that they harm others, not because they're actually setting out to harm others, that there's then no one to forgive. Well, when we realize somebody doesn't really have control over themselves and they're acting through ignorance, then we don't necessarily have to forgive them because we understand them. Yes, Travis.
Yeah, the way I read the sutras a lot of times is just remembering the intent, awakening, awareness, mindfulness, happiness. It doesn't really take the Western psychological approach to try to figure out who, what, when, where, how, and why. It thinks a lot of that is kind of ephemeral. I'm reading Dr. Mark Epstein's book, Zen and Therapy. And he really talks a lot about, from a Buddhist perspective, our relationship to the forms of mind, to the memory, which gets rewritten and rewritten and rewritten, and our relationship to that. And so that kind of builds upon Yoli's insight. But I think of that story of the two monks crossing the river, and I think there was a woman standing there, and the monk, being a gentleman, picked her up and crossed the river and put her down quickly, and they just keep walking and walking and walking, and the fellow monk walking with him is just like, why'd you do that? You're not supposed to do that. You're a monastic. You broke your vows. No. And the other monk, kind of as an expression of wisdom, says, I let her go, or I walked.
I put her down
an hour ago.
Yeah.
And so Epstein's kind of insight is that we hold on to these memories, and we're still living in the past, and those memories ultimately are views that we carry with ourselves. They're often not even accurate. And so what can we do to change our relationship with those memories? Because we can't change the past. So what can we do to heal and move forward?
Yeah, I think that's a very good take on it. So in other words, this sutra was applying towards more of the story that we tell. As long as we're remembering or telling this story to ourselves and keeping the story alive, we'll never be able to get rid of our hatred. Oh, thank you, Travis. That was wonderful. Okay, and Darcy, Neil, would you like to read one? Would you like to read the next one?
Yeah, no problem. Many do not realize that we here must die. For those who realize this, quarrels end. Whoever
Great.
lives.
Oh, 1 second. Are we, I think we're between them. Can you read 5 and 6? Hatred never ends through hatred.
Yep, got it. Hatred never ends through hatred. By non-hate alone does it end. This is an ancient truth. Many do not realize that. We here must die. For those who realize this, quarrels end.
Oh, that's very powerful, huh?
Yeah.
And so that is, again, that's one of the a strong sentiment in Buddhism, is that only love can conquer hatred. Hatred never conquers hatred. And I like the second part. When we realize the true nature of our lives, we realize that we're all going to die. And here we're talking about realize the true nature of ourselves in reality. There's just no place for quarrel. Life is too short to bicker with others, huh? Any comments? I'm glancing through some of the others as we go through. So Gaten Chirpal on the second one says, we are but guests visiting this world, though most do not know this. Those who see the real situation no longer feel inclined to quarrel. I thought that was quite lovely. Okay, some of these are kind of basic. They're very clear messages throughout Buddhism. Darcy, would you like to read the next one? Oh, Gary has a question. Gary? You're muted, Gary. There you go. Do you have a question or a comment, Gary?
Yes. I'm not sure what it means by claiming that hatred can only be replaced by non-hate. Why doesn't it say love, kindness, or compassion?
Well, the Buddha claims that hatred only makes hatred stronger. That in the history of humanity, hatred has never conquered hatred. That only understanding, love, compassion have ever worked against hatred. And to be honest, I don't think he gives a long, in that one case, I don't think he gives a long reason for why that's so. He just claims it almost as if it's a universal law.
Okay.
Darcy, would you like to read the next one?
Sure.
7 and 8. You're muted, Darcy.
There we go. I did click it, but it didn't, I wasn't close enough.
Okay.
Whoever lives focused on the pleasant, senses unguarded, immoderate with food, lazy and sluggish, will be overpowered by Mara, as a weak tree is bent in the wind. Whoever lives focused on the unpleasant, senses guarded, moderate with food, faithful and diligent, will not be overpowered by Mara, as a stone mountain is unmoved by the wind.
So there's a lot to read into this one. First of all, let's define what Mara is. So Mara is an interesting character in Buddhism. So Mara, actually, in its oldest translation, Mara is kind of the Lord of Death. At later times, Mara is replaced by Yama. So in Tibetan Buddhism, Yama is the Lord of Death. But Mara, often we see Mara as being equivalent to the devil in Western religion, and it's not true. So Mara, in its most modern take, is not a deity at all. Mara represents our own afflictions, our own ignorance, our own limitations. So when the Buddha talks about battling Mara as he's trying to gain enlightenment, these are his own qualities, his own afflictions, his own limitations as he's battling to overcome. So this is the most widely thought of definition of Mara, not as a deity or a being of any kind, but simply of all the aspects of ourselves that we're trying to purify and get rid of. Secondly, what I focus on is this idea in the second verse, focusing on the unpleasant. So this is this verse gets a little tricky because this kind of gets into a problem that we have interpreting the sutras, where many scholars assert that the earlier sutras, or what many believe are possibly more authentically spoken by the Buddha, are much more positive than the later. Many assert that as Buddhism progresses, the Pali tradition, especially in the Theravada tradition, where it's more focused on monasticism, and especially through the work again of Buddhaghosa in the 15th century, that Buddhism starts to take a darker look at these things, where the sutras are interpreted as meaning, turn away from all pleasures of the world, guard the senses. But in earlier works, it seems like the Buddha doesn't have that in mind. What Buddha is talking about is curbing our attachment to those things. He's not saying to watch and to pay attention to only the unpleasant things, but our attachment to the unpleasant. So in Gaten Chipel's take on this, on the second verse, he says, aware of the unpleasant side of life, senses controlled and appetites contained. Oh, you know what I'm thinking? I could put this up so you can follow it with me. If I can find it, where is it? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me see if I can find it. There it is. Aware of the unpleasant side of life, senses controlled and appetites contained, full of faith and effort, you are like a mountain of rock in a storm, and Mara cannot touch you. So a couple words in here. The word faith here is not religious faith. This is trust in what you understand. Faith in that your practice and your studies are accurate, that you're on the right path. So this is more of an informed faith, that through study and practice you found that the Buddha's teachings are beneficial, then you develop faith in that. It's not blind faith. But here you can see he's talking about being aware of the unpleasant side of life. So in a sense, we could say someone who's living an examined life, right? So the first verse appears to be more about someone who's superficial, living for the pursuit of pleasure, a hedonist, right? Hedonist. Senses endlessly stimulated, all appetites fed, undisciplined and lazy. You will be blown away by Mara. So this is someone who's superficial, that just looks for the pleasures in life. But the second one isn't a person who, like in the first, says, focuses on the unpleasant. Now, I'm sure Gil Fronsdale is correct, but I'm just saying that it seems to have a flavor of the later interpretations of the Pali Sutras instead of the earlier. And Gaten Chirpo seems to have the feeling of the earlier, which to me seems to represent what I believe the Buddhist teachings hold. And so being aware of the unpleasant side of life, and what that means in Buddhism is, of course, is investigating our suffering, understanding our suffering, seeing both the pleasant and the unpleasant. So living an investigated life, right? Controlling our senses, and again, controlling our attachment, right? Our appetites contained, again, our attachments, full of faith and effort. We're like rocks that our limitations and our afflictions cannot touch. That's my take. What do you think? So I thought that was one of the most fascinating verses. Darcy.
I agree with your take on it, and I did the one by the last one you were reading. It made so much more sense to me that you're going to be aware of what's going to do damage to you or what's not going to be pleasant, rather than you're not focusing on it, you're just aware.
Yeah, and I think and many scholars assert, and I believe I feel the same way, that a lot of the negativity as far as looking at the world really kind of trickles in from a lot of the advice that the Buddha gave to monastics. Like for monastics to practice celibacy, the Buddha would say, or later scholars would say, look at the body as being something dirty. Now, and the interpretation is, he's not saying the body is dirty. He's saying if you're trying to be celibate, look at these things as if they're unappealing, they're unpleasant to you. And so that kind of trickles in, and then it becomes advice that for all of us, that all things in the world are Mara, and we shouldn't indulge. We should look at our suffering and only that, and practice. And I think that this is a huge misunderstanding in the Buddhist teachings, because in early Buddhist teachings, the Buddha is so much more about joy and happiness and friendliness, where metta in the early sutras isn't translated as loving kindness, but more as friendliness. Having this friendliness, not just to people, but to yourself and into your environment itself, living with this friendly attitude towards the world. So as I've written in some of my texts, that it seems very clear to me that the earlier texts are much more joyful, and I believe that was more of what the Buddha may have said. And I think, like always, the traditions kind of make it heavy. The traditions wanted to turn it into religion. And so a lot of these heavy points kind of trickle in. And John Peacock was one who I've studied for a long time, and those are some of his views, by the way. He's a brilliant early Pali scholar from Oxford. He teaches with Stephen Batchelor, and just brilliant stuff. Yeah. Would anybody else like to share? David?
Yeah, I'd just like to say a wee thing about Mara. I personally, I have no time for the sort of mythical image of Mara, but a thing that I do find useful is sometimes if I spot myself doing something unskillful or having an unskillful thought, and I note it and I go, aha, I see you, Mara. And that puts a lighter touch to the unskillful act, and also puts it completely in its place. So I personally find it very useful to use it in that kind of personal context.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think that that's the reason why it's turned into an archetype. Mara's turned into an archetype of a being, because it's easy to practice it like that, right? But Mara is simply all these uncontrollable habits and patterns, especially the non-virtuous ones that we have and we have trouble dealing with. In SBT, we call our shared human limitations. Yoli or Chantal?
Tharpa, when I read that specific text, I sort of contrasted how I grew up, that salvation and liberation was something that was granted. And from a Buddhist perspective, you now have this agency that, no, it's not really granted, is you work for it. And you have the ability to attain that through effort. And when I read in the foreword, there was this emphasis that a Buddhist path specifically is one that you do by yourself, and you attain the fruits of that path by yourself. So it's a very powerful thing in Buddhism that it's sort of centered around what you do and what your perceptions are, and the Eightfold Path, and how you interpret that, and also how you affect all of that.
Yeah, and we call that purification, right? Mm-hmm. In other religions, we think of purifications, some invisible thing we're getting rid of. Where Buddhism, purification is purification of your view, right? Developing the right view, how you look at the world. Seeing the world, seeing yourself accurately, right? And what you said, Yoli, comes back to the first verse, doesn't it? that all things are preceded by the mind, right? The mind is the center of all of it. Purify the mind, you purify your life. Beautifully said. Would anyone else like to share? Okay, so we're making good progress. Oh, Chantel, would you like to read the next? Oh, you don't have your text, was that right? Yeah. Oh, Nigel, would you like to read the next one? I didn't see you down there, Nigel. Welcome.
Oh, sure, I'll be happy to. Okay, see couplet 9 and 10.
It's 9 and 10, thank you.
9 and 10, yeah. Whoever is defiled and devoid of self-control and truth, yet wears the saffron robe, is unworthy of the saffron robe. Whoever has purged the defilements is self-controlled, truthful, and well established in virtue, is worthy of the saffron robe.
Thank you. And I think that this is pretty clear. We have a few to get through, so I'm not going to comment on all of them, but it seems to be centered on hypocrisy. And when they talk about, in this text, when they talk about monastics, we want to translate that to just practitioners, to good practitioners. Monastics don't have anything on you. A good practitioner is a good practitioner. So, but I think it's here what they're just simply talking about hypocrisy. You know, you are your actions, not what you claim to be. Any comments? We'll move on to the next one.
Yeah. Is there any significance to a saffron robe as opposed to a plum robe or some other color of robe? Was that a high-ranking robe?
It's not. So in the early text, saffron is the recommended color of any Buddhist robe. And then saffron, the color can change from a dark maroon all the way up to a bright yellow. So in the Buddhist day, monks had to have the color of saffron in the robe. So it just means a Buddhist monastic.
Oh, yeah.
Nowadays, the different colors represent different traditions usually.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, an easy question. Thank you. Darcy, would you like to read the next one? And that's going to be 11 and 12.
Okay. Those who consider the inessential to be essential and see the essential as inessential don't reach the essential, living in the field of wrong intention. Those who know the essential to be essential and the inessential as inessential reach the essential, living in the field of right intention.
Darcy, would you like to give your take on that?
Yeah. For me, I like in a modern situation, I think that the first part talks about people that look at material things as being important and essential, things that we can probably live without, that are wants and not necessarily needs, and that they don't reach what the true meaning of importance is. But if we realize that from the beginning, then we do reach that level.
Yeah, very good. And I would kind of reorganize it. I would say that it really has a lot to do with right view and wrong views. The first verse is people that have wrong views of themselves and the nature of reality. When we mean that, we mean having the wrong view of who and what they are, how they relate to their environment, their understanding of reality itself. Now, the last line in both of them is very important when they talk about the intention, right? Living with wrong or right intentions, because it's our understanding of our true nature and the true nature of reality which sets our intention. By our view of what life is and how we're going to live life, that is the direction for our intentions. So without understanding, we really can't have proper intention, or we can't be sure that our intention is virtuous. So in Buddhism, we call this right view. So this is actually a very important verse. This sets the stage for the understanding of right view. If you don't understand yourself and the world around you, liberation is just gonna be very difficult, if not impossible. And through that understanding, we can gain liberation.
So that goes back to the Eightfold Path.
Very much so.
Okay. Thank
Very
you for
much
that.
so. Oh,
That clears it up even more.
you're welcome. Any other thoughts on that? We have a few, so I'm gonna. Travis, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I'll keep it short. For me, I find practicing the living Dharma is essential. I do find that there's a lot of, for me as a householder, not a scholar, the debates between the schools is non-essential. And so for me, I'm slowly but surely moving away from kind of analyzing the difference, the critiques between the monastic and the householder, and then the different schools, and just practicing, because it's really about what's true. It's not about this endless translation. It's Stephen Batchelor's fascinating. I'm reading tons of his stuff, but sometimes he gets really caught up in translation. I'm just like, this really isn't helping. But it is really fascinating.
Well, Travis, welcome to SBT. I couldn't have said it better myself. You should write the foreword for our books. That's exactly what we feel as well. Yeah, we don't need to get too into it. It's about practicing and experiencing it, really embodying the teachings, right? And so that's our goal as well. Thank you, Travis. And Neil, would you like to read the next one? Which is 13 and 14?
Yeah. As rain penetrates an ill-thatched house, so lust penetrates an uncultivated mind. As rain does not penetrate a well-thatched house, so lust does not penetrate a well-cultivated mind.
Lovely, thank you. Do you have any thoughts on that, Neil?
A few. Basically, if your mind is untrained, you're letting anything in, undesirable thoughts and things like that. Whereas if you train the mind, it doesn't allow unnecessary thoughts to penetrate.
Beautifully said. I'm just going over some of the other ones as you're speaking, just trying to stay up on top of it all. I think that's beautiful, and I'd like to share Gaten Chipel's view, because they talk about lust, but of course it's so much more than that, right? Lust is just one quality. Here Gaten Chipel says, just as the rain leaks into a house with a poorly made roof, desire and attachment will seep into a house unprotected by meditative awareness. So I think Gaten Chipel's translation, he adds a lot, but I think he's trying to really get at the true meaning of them. Because remember, he's studying from a great Pali scholar in Sri Lanka, and he himself is a brilliant scholar. Just as the rain does not enter a house with a well-made roof, desire and attachment do not enter a house protected by meditative awareness. So I'm really liking the Gaten Chipel edition, but we got them all, right? Yeah. That's lovely. Oh, and Yoli, would you like to read the next one? Which is gonna be, it's a little bit of work for me to keep up with all of this. I think we have 15 and 16. I'll get the hang of it.
One who does evil grieves in this life, grieves in the next, grieves in both worlds. Seeing one's own defiled acts brings grief and affliction. One who makes merit rejoices in this life, rejoices in the next, rejoices in both worlds. Seeing one's own pure acts brings joy and delight.
Do you have any views on that? Ms. Yola?
Yeah, it basically says that if you continue with your habitual tendencies and not train your mind, you will continue to suffer. But if you are diligent in your practice, then you won't suffer, is basically what it's saying.
Brilliant. And from a secular point of view, when they talk about the next life, we can just talk about the future, because lifetimes can be, they're also moment to moment, you know, whether you believe in rebirth or not. We leave that belief up to the individual. We don't have a position on it with SPT. But in phrases like this, we can just talk about the future, right? And again, I'd like to refer to Gaiden Shirpos, who has a brilliant take on the second verse. Rejoicing in this lifetime. It seems like Gaiden Shirpal keeps the joy that I believe the original teachings really had. It seems like those are kind of there throughout this. Rejoicing in this life becomes rejoicing in the next. The one who does good rejoices in both. When you see how pure your actions have been, you will be happy, you will rejoice. So in a sense, he's talking about happiness in the future is built on happiness right now and working with joy. Oh, I thought that's lovely. And Chantel?
Prabhupada, I saw that from a cause-effect perspective. In other words, if one is right now very mindful and present, then when you're there, you have a lot of joy. Consequently, your effect of that action is also going to be joyful. So it's not so much my interpretation. Yes, I do agree with that, but I saw it more from a present moment and what's the effect of that present moment. So if you are here and you are completely absorbed mindfully and affirmatively in something, then obviously the effect of your actions will also be joyful.
I agree. It really is. It is the blueprint for karma, isn't it? He's really talking about karma itself. Buddhaghosa says the doer of good rejoices here and hereafter. So that's kind of cool. That's like now and in the future. He rejoices in both the worlds. He rejoices and exalts, recollecting his own pure deeds. The evildoer suffers here and thereafter. He suffers from both worlds. The thought that evil I have done torments him, and he suffers even more when gone in the realms of woe. So Bodharakitas are quite poetic. There's a lot of kind of Buddhist poetry to them, aren't there? But I think you're exactly right, Chantel. That literally is the blueprint for karma. Do good and good will follow. Do bad and bad will follow. Any thoughts? All right. I think we're going about this pretty good. It'll take me a few classes to get the timing down, and because there's so many verses, how do we time it for about an hour, right? So I think we're doing good so far. Darcy, would you like to read the next ones, which are 17 and 18? Oh, I'm sorry.
One who does evil is tormented in this life, tormented in the next, is tormented in both worlds. Here he is tormented, knowing I have done evil. Reborn in realms of woe, he is tormented all the more. One who makes merit is delighted in this life, delighted in the next, is delighted in both worlds. Here she is delighted, knowing I have made merit. Reborn in the realms of bliss, she delights all the more.
Thank you. And of course, when they're talking about merit, that means earning virtue. So merit's the idea of earning good karma, earning goodness that stays with you. And I believe that it's a real thing. When we do good acts, when we're kind, when we're helpful to others, when we're altruistic, compassionate, generous, we feel better about ourselves, don't we? I mean, that's a real thing we feel, and it's a real thing we keep. And if we have a habit of it, we believe ourselves to be very good people, don't we? Oh, lovely. Any thoughts? I think these couple are straightforward. Oh, good. Yoli, would you like to read the next one, which is on 19 and 20?
Sure. One who recites many teachings, but being negligent doesn't act accordingly, like a coward counting others' cows, does not attain the benefits of the contemplative life. One who recites but a few teachings, yet lives according to the Dhamma, abandoning passion, ill will, and delusion, aware and with mind well fed, not clinging in this life or the next, attains the benefits of the contemplative life.
This is a lovely last verse for chapter 1, huh? I think it's quite beautiful. Does anyone have any thoughts? Or questions? You don't need to. I'm just opening up the space for any of us. Of course, I'll have something to say on each one of them. I just don't want to dominate. Scott, did you have a comment?
Question. What kind of definition can you give to Dharma?
So Dhamma is, usually in Buddhism, we think of the word Buddhadharma, and generally we think of the teachings of the Buddha. But Dharma is an ancient word that existed before the Buddha. Some definitions are truth, like universal truth, duty, honor. They can be action. I've even heard Dharma used as phenomena in the world, as worldly dharmas. So Dharma can have many, many uses, but generally we think of it as the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, Dharma being the teachings of the Buddha. Again, I'd like to show you Gaten Shirpa's. I'm really falling in love with Gaten Shirpa's. I studied a lot of Gaten Shirpa in the monastery when I was in Tibetan monasteries. And I'm sure at some point I read through this, but it feels like I'm reading it all anew, like I've never seen it before. And I'm thoroughly enjoying it. So on the second verse, he says, "You are to be numbered among the priesthood." Now, of course, that means monastics. But again, here, let's just say, authentic practitioners. You are to be numbered as an authentic practitioners, though you know little philosophy, if your actions accord with the Dharma, and you have renounced desire, hatred, and delusion, the three poisons. If your mind is imbued with genuine wisdom, and you cling to nothing in this world or the next. I bet Travis likes this one. This one speaks to Travis's view. It's quite beautiful, isn't it? What I like about it, it's inclusive. It's like, hey, don't worry, you don't got to know everything. Be a good practitioner. Put the Buddha's teachings into play. Be kind, be friendly, gain some wisdom. Stop being focused on all the worldly things, right? Travis? See you, Steve.
Yeah, I definitely like looking at the different translations because I think that understanding all the translations helps us understand a living Dharma, and only understanding one is not to really understand a living Dharma. So being attached to one translation over the next is to kind of not really walk the middle way, but it's also to kind of not understand some of these complex teachings.
Well said. But with that said, there's nothing wrong with one speaking to you more than others, even if you don't have a logical reason for it. It could just be that it corresponds more to your own view, which is not very open-minded, but very human. So, but that's what, you're exactly right. That's why we have the different texts. And what happens is when we have a broader range of a broader base of knowledge, which in SBT, we thoroughly encourage everyone to have the broadest base of knowledge possible. What happens is through that, you have a greater ability to contrast and compare. This is where true wisdom comes from. So like a stupid analogy, say, you live on an island and you've never seen the world, and you say, this is the most beautiful island in the world. You might really believe it, But you have really no way to contrast and compare. And then you meet a world traveler who's been to hundreds of islands, and he really has the wisdom behind it all. So I found in my own practice, the broader my knowledge base, the more wise I feel, the more informed I feel. And it seems like the truth is tangible. We actually can really get a grasp of what it is. And with that said, as a proud agnostic and member of SBT, I'm all about the mystery and the ideas that, will any of us ever know what the Buddha really said? Come on, look at the history of these teachings, right? We're looking at the Buddha. He gives these in oral transmission. Everybody's remembering these teachings through oral translations. They're not written down to 500 years after the Buddha passes away. Then for thousands of years, they're taught and they're embellished upon. Things are added to it. Modern scholars, even Bhikkhu Bodhi, some very traditional modern scholars, all say, it's clear that, there's additions to this. These are not purely the ideas of the Buddha. The people have added interpretations and created different presentations of these. This is one of the big pushes of secular Buddhism, that secular Buddhism is trying to get a glimpse beyond that and look at the teachings more objectively and think, with what we know in modern times of the different traditions, is it possible for us to get a clear view of what the Buddha might have really said? But with that said, I don't believe we ever will. So I think when Travis is talking about living Dharma, I think, we do our best to educate ourselves, and in a sense, we rely on masters to show us what practices are beneficial and fruitful. And so that's what we do in SBT. We highlight those practices that we believe are the most informative, the most fruitful, the most illuminating. But, none of us really know. Jennifer.
I have a question for you about the three jewels.
Sure.
And the definition of Sangha. I'm reading a book right now, it's like Subtin Chadran.
Hidden Children. Yeah.
And okay, and in there she's talking about how Sangha can be referred to as we refer to ourselves, but in the three jewels, it's considered a conventional representation of the Sangha jewel. Can you explain that?
I think that none of us can really say what the true definition of Sangha is, because so many different traditions have so many different takes on it. So from the most open translation is the congregation of Buddhist practitioners. The SBT, okay. This is our Sangha here. And then you get into, the next translation would be, any four monks in a group is considered a Sangha. And the idea, if you don't have four monks, and they really mean monks, not nuns, really sadly, if you don't have four monks in a country, that country is not said to really have the Dharma. That there needs to be a minimum of four to create, and that's a monastic Sangha, but they use the word Sangha. And then in a more esoteric way, they talk about Sangha as being the field of enlightened beings. The Buddha and all of the other enlightened practitioners, past and alive. So there's all these different takes on what Sangha is, and they're all accurate. I'll often use them all in different ways. I usually refer to the monastic Sangha when I think about four monks or more. And then I think of Sangha as just being the group here.
Okay, thank you.
And the Sangha jewel is congregation, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, she's trying to say there's a difference between the congregation that we get together with the Sangha in the three jewels. She's saying are those beings who have direct, non-conceptual understanding of reality.
Yeah, that was the third one that I talked about, the enlightened beings.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, you're welcome. And so getting back to it, I think and again, if you notice that I don't tell people what to think or believe. I share my knowledge, in SBT, we leave belief up to the individual. I share hopefully some information that's useful to you all, but I can't tell you what's accurate and what's not. I can tell you what practices have been fruitful for me. I can suggest practices for the group that I believe will be fruitful. But in Buddhism, we all have to awaken ourselves. You can't put that duty on anyone else. So SBT, we're a source of information and knowledge. We talk about the Buddhist teachings, but we do it in a very open way, right? We never tell people what is, because we don't know. We're proud agnostics. And I think all paths, all wisdom leads to agnosticism. In my life, no matter what I've studied, what directions I've moved, it always seems like wisdom all comes together in agnosticism. The understanding that there just isn't any certainty. Unless the Buddha was sitting right here in front of us, we really don't really know exactly what the Buddha may have said. Do we have to? I don't think it matters. We can only work with what we have. We can only do the best we can. Is it beneficial? Oh yeah. For myself, it works. And so that's my little speech. So we're going to keep that narrative throughout this series. And also the traditions themselves, be it the Tibetan Theravada, Zen, the Mahayana traditions, they all have really rigid views and dogmas. Tibetan Buddhism believes that every word in the Tibetan canon are the actual words of the Buddha. That the Buddha gave all the Mahayana teachings, the Buddha gave all the tantric teachings himself in private, in secret, and they later came out. So most of the traditions believe that, but in those traditions, there's a lot of progressive people that have different views. So as a group, we're going to explore that. And as a group, we're going to share ideas. But as a group, SBT, we're all going to have different beliefs, and that's the beauty of it. We're not here to tell anybody what to think, what to do, what to believe. We just want to help everyone on their path to awakening. And with that said, we're about 10 minutes after. We did pretty good. The format seemed okay to everybody? There's enough room for everybody there's a bit of material to cover, so we kind of have to get through it, don't we? So I think I'll kind of go ahead and I'll kind of highlight certain things that need to be talked about, especially vocabulary. And then we'll have to kind of run through the sutras each week when we do it. But I thought it was really cool. So with that said, the class isn't necessarily over. Go right to our Dharma group on WhatsApp. Post your questions, post your opinions. You all have the books. Say, on verse 3, I think that this. We can really explore that more on the Dharma groups, right? And I'll be there to help with any questions that you have. So let's make this part of our living practice, as Travis mentioned. Let's try to embody these qualities. And I think the big takeaway from this chapter, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's just goodness. That seems to be the whole takeaway of this. It's all just, in this one, is goodness. And that's my main practice, is embodying goodness. I think when I look at the greatest masters that I know, one of the qualities that leaps out is incredible goodness. Even the Christian mystics that I know and I've studied with, that's one of the qualities that all the greats possess, that an incredible level of goodness. Not just ethics, not just being, he's pretty generous, always gives the bums a buck. We're talking about this incredible goodness that they imbue, and they just radiate, they shine with that goodness. I think that that's a great catalyst in our practice. One should be one that we should all take advantage of. Okay, I've gabbed enough. Let's end today's studies with our with their altruistic affirmation. May all be healthy, may all be prosperous, may all be well, may all be present, free of past regret and future world. May all abide in constant appreciation, which is a source of great joy and contentment. May all realize their true nature and the true nature of reality, which is awakening. Thanks for joining me. See you tomorrow for tomorrow's class. We're learning mindfulness in our 10-week meditation program.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Tapa.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.